My guest today is Vermont Attorney General T.J. Donovan. T.J. is a Vermonter, fellow Seahorse graduate as I am from Burlington High School. And he has very deep roots in the Vermont legal and judicial history. He's AG now, but he was the Chittenden County State's Attorney and the grandson of U.S. District Court Judge Bernard Lady. TJ, welcome. You don't mind if I call you TJ, do you?
I don't, Elliott. Great to see you. I didn't know that you were a fellow Seahorse.
Class of 66, a little before yours.
Well, as I like to say, a lot of things that I use in today's in my business, I learned at Burlington High School. What a great place to learn about life, to be exposed to so many different people. Some of my best friends to this day are the guys I grew up with and went to high school with.
Let's move on to our topic of the day, which is fraud and scams in Vermont. And before we get into any details, I'd just like to have you overview what the role of the Attorney General is in consumer protection.
Sure. Well, the Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer for the state of Vermont. And we have about 150 employees in the state, which makes us the largest law firm. We have 7 different divisions, and one of which is the Public Protection Division, which of course includes the Consumer Protection Division. And consumer protection is exactly what it sounds, is standing up and protecting consumers, whether they are an individual or in Vermont, a small business. And, you know, as we now exist in an online world, the future of consumer protection, in my opinion, is online.
There's a particular department or office of the AG's office that handles consumer complaints and consumer issues, the Consumer Assistance Program. If you could describe what that does, and we will provide folks with the link to that website.
Sure. So as I said, within that Public Protection Division, we have our Consumer Protection Unit made up of lawyers and investigators. We also have a wonderful program called the Consumer Assistance Program, or CAP, C-A-P, and that is in partnership and collaboration with the University of Vermont. And it helps Vermont consumers resolve disputes between businesses, protect themselves from fraud, and access available services. And so what CAP does is we operate a consumer hotline for information and assistance. That number that you're going to put up is 802-649-2424. 802-649-2424. So we operate a consumer hotline, and those phones are manned by students from UVM, and they do just a tremendous job working with folks. And I just have heard such positive feedback from those students who I think get real life experience working with Vermonters from all walks of life trying to solve their problems. It's a wonderful program. So in addition to operating that hotline, we also mediate consumer disputes with businesses, as I said. We track fraud and scam complaints, and we recover thousands of dollars for consumers every year. And it's a great program. It's a wonderful partnership with UVM. As I said earlier, it gives these students, I think, real practical experience about how the world works, how you deal with consumers and work with consumers and solve people's problems. Elliott, as I often say, every call that comes into the Attorney General's office may not be the most important call for that particular employee of the Attorney General that day. But I can guarantee you this, it is the most important call for that consumer, because they're calling, and they're calling because there's a problem or they have a crisis and they need our help. And so I really try to set the tone about having that sense of urgency, to try to solve problems for Vermonters. Oftentimes it's about money, and in the grand scheme of things, it may not be a lot of money when you talk about the state budget, but a couple $100 to a Vermonter, that's a lot of money. And so we work very hard to get that money back to Vermonters, to make sure that we really value, like Vermonters value, their hard-earned money. And we try to stand up and protect people and solve their problems for them. The one thing that I'm incredibly proud about the Consumer Assistance Program, I think we get over 13,000 calls a year. And it's really that one place in state government where you're going to talk to an actual person, where that individual has been trained, they know how to navigate state government and the bureaucracy of state government, and their goal is simply to solve people's problems. It's a wonderful program.
Thank you. Being the person at the head of this whole operation, I'm assuming that TJ and TJ's family and friends aren't victims or been approached by fraud. Is that true?
No, you'd be wrong, Elliott. I get a lot of calls from folks, people who I grew up with. Again, I think, Elliott, as you know, growing up in Vermont and growing up in Burlington, the thing about the Vermont is so special is we're such a small state, and the closeness of each other and the community we have and the accessibility of public officials in this state, I think, is a wonderful thing. And so quite often I will get called from people saying that they've run into a problem and they need our help. I got a call from an individual who I know yesterday who they had essentially a national company is withholding some money from them. Not a lot of money in the scheme of things, but a lot of money to them. And I really welcome the opportunity that people can reach me directly. Some folks on my team sometimes get upset with me because everybody has my number and they call me. But I just think that's the way we do business in Vermont. And so we've certainly I've had family members who have been scammed. And I think one of the big things, I know we'll talk about scams a little bit down the road of the show here, is that there's a real degree of shame and embarrassment, I think, attached to people being scammed, and they can't believe once it's happened to them that they were actually scammed. And so a big part of this is sharing our stories with each other, because this is happening to everybody. And, I just welcome the opportunity to talk to Vermonters. And as I like to say to them, if I can help them, I will. And I'll always try. And really just trying to put myself in the shoes of that ordinary, regular Vermonter, which I am. And, when you pay a couple $100 and you don't pay for the service, or you don't get the good that you thought you were getting, that's a lot of money. And people, so I understand the value of a dollar, like most Vermonters. And I understand that people expect to be treated fairly in this state. And I try to have those as my guiding principles when we talk about how best to protect consumers.
Thank you. The overall scam scene seems to be getting out of control. You've been in office for 4 years,
Yep.
Just about 4 years. And I'm sure, looking at the reports from your office, those numbers aren't dwindling. They are growing at an alarming rate. But we're also seeing things, for instance, the FTC, Federal Trade Commission,
Yep.
tracks fraud, the FBI tracks fraud, you track fraud. You guys don't share that, though, do you?
No, we in terms of the information sharing from the federal government to us.
Yeah.
No, there isn't a lot of information sharing, and there probably should be. And, you certainly have this system, as we do in many different areas of the law, where you have a federal bureaucracy, the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission. And then you obviously have state government in terms of consumer protection. But look, at the end of the day, this is the state's role. These are Vermonters. These are our constituents. And so, as I said earlier, I really take it personally that this is our job to stand up for folks, to have that sense of urgency. And as you said, the scams are on the rise. And when you're looking, at least in Vermont, when you're talking about scams, the number one is still the Social Security phishing scam. And it's 43% of the complaints to our consumer assistance program. And, as you know, Elliott, the scam attempts to obtain your Social Security number by posing as a Social Security administration or a business. They try to access your Social Security number by telling you it's been compromised or stolen, or that it's expired. And that really gets into identity theft that we can talk about a little bit later. But the most important thing is how you spot the scam is that Social Security, and we can talk about this with the IRS too, if they wanted to contact you, they would not call you. The federal government, whether it's the Social Security or the IRS, is not going to call you to ask for your personal information or your bank account information, and especially not your Social Security number over the phone. They're not going to call you. The federal government,
to that, they're not going to send you an email.
That's right. They're going to mail you. It's going to be snail mail.
Yep.
And I think that's the biggest word that we need to get out to folks is that these government agencies, whether it's the Social Security Administration or the IRS, they're not going to call you or they're not going to email you. They will send you a piece of mail with a postage stamp, the old-fashioned way. So never give your information over the phone. And the federal government, they're not going to threaten you over the phone to try to coerce to get your information or in the worst case, a payment over the phone.
I guess, when we look at this then, and we see your numbers, and we see the FTC numbers, and we see the FBI numbers, and we see the Vermont Department of Financial Regulation numbers, we really should be putting all these numbers together to get a more honest picture of the total. I want to go into some specific items.
Sure.
And right now, we're seeing a lot of concern around the COVID-19 scams. Has there been any uptick or number of reports coming into your office about COVID-related?
A few things. I mean, I think the biggest thing in terms of COVID was, of course, regarding the stimulus money that came out as a result of this COVID pandemic, or the stimulus checks. And so it's relatively small. I think it's 19 that we have with CAP. I mean, I guess this gets back to your earlier point, Elliott, in terms of sharing that information and combining the data from the federal government. But most of the scams in terms of COVID were, the free government stimulus money. We haven't received any scams related to COVID cures, but we know that from the FTC that those scams are out there. I know other states are dealing with those. And so this is why we really encourage folks to call our consumer assistance program, because we need to know what's going on in order so we can act. I mean, now this gets not really into a scam, but getting back to that larger consumer protection issue, that the consumer protection law is essentially, it protects against what's called unfair or deceptive acts. And we went to court against an individual who we believed was engaged in price gouging and selling PPE, personally protective equipment, masks and whatnot. And we went to court and got a court order because he was jacking up the price, at best 500%, at worst 2,500%, selling these items and misrepresenting what these masks were to local healthcare facilities. And so not only from the COVID scams in terms of the stimulus money, making sure that people are not engaged in price gouging. We've gotten a lot of complaints, and price gouging, we don't have a specific price gouging statute in Vermont. We do when it comes to, I think, heating fuel, propane and such, but we don't have a price gouging statute on the books in Vermont. So we go under our consumer protection law, which prohibits those unfair or deceptive acts in commerce. And we thought that this individual who was increasing the price again between 500% and 2,500% was engaged in unfair consumer acts. And we went to court and we were able to get an injunction to stop him from selling at those prices. And so we have a lot of tools, and so those are certainly the big ones that are out there. We've gotten a lot of calls about price gouging or what people think are price gouging in the grocery stores here in Vermont. Obviously, one of the big ones, Elliott, was the cost of toilet paper. Or the cost of eggs, for example, was another big one that came out. And I think, as I said earlier, we're in Vermont when it comes to price gouging, again, getting back to how small and close we are as a state, there's really no upside to a local business price gouging their consumers, because their consumers today are going to be the consumers tomorrow. And we got long memories in Vermont, Elliott, as you know. And so we haven't had a lot of issues with Vermont businesses engaging in price gouging. We've certainly gotten complaints about people in terms of that toilet paper and eggs and some other goods. But again, we have to be able to answer that legal question about whether or not it is legally unfair or deceptive. We've also, one of the other issues we've seen in terms of the COVID scams or price gouging that we're concerned about is really those third-party platforms such as Amazon or eBay, where you have those third-party sellers. And there's been some instances that we've been concerned about in terms of people engaged in price gouging on those platforms. So we reached out to Amazon and to Walmart, some of the big players in this area, to say, hey, we need you as a partner when we have those third-party sellers who are engaged in price gouging. You need to take them down, and you need to shut them down quickly. And so I'm very proud of that work, because we need that public-private collaboration to address the issues of price gouging at all times, but in particular during this pandemic.
My guest today is TJ Donovan. He's the Vermont Attorney General, and I want to bring up a topic that I know is very important to you, and that is data brokers. And maybe you could do a very short explanation of what a data broker is and what has happened to protect people from some of their practices.
Yeah, and I appreciate that question, Elliott. So first, let me just kind of set the context here. When we're talking about data, we're talking about people's personal information that is online. Everything we do now is online, where you got to enter in your name, your address, your phone number, your credit card, your social security number. And so there's all this personal information out there that we put out there. And that information is being bought and sold. And consumers have no idea that this information is being bought and sold. And oftentimes it's being bought and sold from third parties called data brokers. And data brokers are companies where Vermont consumers are really, any consumer has no direct relationship and never heard of it. So it's a third party so you've engaged in some transaction with company X. Company X then sells your information to this third-party data broker. And so from the Vermont consumer, they have no relationship with that third-party data broker. They never heard of it. So what they do is they collect this information from various sources, package it up, and sell it to whoever wants to pay. And this is big money because the data is a commodity now. Everything is online. And it's obviously sold for a number of reasons, marketing being one of them. As you know, if you're anytime you're online on your personal device, you start getting certain ads. Your information is being sold. So that's has been very concerning to me. I think, you know, in Vermont, we have a proud tradition of privacy that is really part of our culture and part of our tradition here. And the question is, well, how do we define privacy in the online world? What does that look like? And for me, it's about transparency. For me, it's about consumers having the right to know and understanding where their information is going. And really from this larger conceptual standpoint, how is it that we have this whole economy operating on your information, Elliott, that you have no idea about, that you never consented it to being sold, and that it's your information? Should you be compensated for that information? But in 2019, Vermont, really at the urging of my office, became the first state in the nation to regulate this data broker industry, that they now have to do annual reporting requirements, and they must tell consumers whether they allow them to opt out of their databases, and if so, how to do it. So if somebody has information on you, that a Vermont consumer can opt out. Now look, we should have a question about whether it should be an opt-in going forward, which is, I think, a little bit more protective of consumers. But what we're really doing is shining the light on this industry that nobody knows about, that certainly Vermont consumers have no information, really have very little information about that their information is being bought and sold on this, really this third-party marketplace. And so my office works very closely to monitor this space. We just became the first state again where we filed a complaint against a data broker, Clearview AI, for violating Vermont's consumer protection and data broker laws. Clearview has collected billions of photographs off the web, including children's photographs, with no knowledge to parents, to kids, and they put facial recognition technology on it and they sell it. So your family, we could be walking down the street and your kid could be identified, could be placed in a virtual lineup, subject to some sort of digital search that you don't know that's happening, and it's going on without your permission or without your consent. And so I think that's wrong. I'm asking the court to stop it. I understand that we live in an online world, that it's a digital world, but I think consumers have rights. I think consumers have a right to know that their information, that their photographs are being bought and sold, and then this facial recognition technology, which is biometric, is being applied to these photos and being sold. Vermonters have a right to know, and that's why we're fighting to ask a Vermont court to stop that.
Okay, thank you. We're getting towards the end, and I want you to share with us what you feel some of the best practices for consumers would be in terms of dealing with fraud and scams.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I think, you know, as we talked about earlier, a lot of these come by phone, and we know the number of robocalls are just insanely high, and by email. But here's the bottom line. Never give out your personal sensitive information over the phone or send payments, whether by wire transfer, gift card, which is a big one, or mail to people you don't know. And always remember, Elliott, I think things that we learned growing up in Burlington, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. But call us at the Consumer Assistance Program to get the information and the answers you need. You can also report scams to the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, which can also be helpful in the tracking and enforcing laws against the nationwide schemers. But I think the big thing is, really, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. And anytime you feel pressured to give money over the phone, you need to take a step back, count to 10, and say, boy, let me just check with somebody on this. This doesn't sound right to me. These scammers are good. They pressure people. Elliott, we didn't talk about it, but that grandparent scam, where scammers pose as grandchildren and claim to be in serious trouble, such as in prison or hospital, and they urgently need money and request money, either through a wired fund or a prepaid gift card. It's an incredibly emotional scam, but people should just take a moment, call your grandkid, call another family member, confirm that this is actually what's going on, but never wire or send the money unless you can verify the emergency. That is the key here. It really is about verifying what's being asked. If it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. Never give your information over the phone when somebody calls you. And if you're feeling pressured, it's usually a scam.
I just want to add one little comment,
yeah.
Which is when I do presentations, I also say, if something is being offered to you online or on the phone at no charge, you're not the consumer, you're the product.
That's right. Yeah, it's a good line. And look, I think what the thing that I would end with, Elliott, is what I said at the outset is, this is happening to everybody. There's no reason to be ashamed or embarrassed about it. It happens to everybody. And we can actually help our neighbors, our family members, our community members by sharing these stories of these scams, of these frauds, so people can spot them. So I really urge Vermonters to call us at 649-2424. I want to thank you, Elliott, and of course the great work of AARP and the Fraud Watch programs that you guys put on. And we just got to share. We got to share our stories, and we got to work with each other to stand up for each other. Because a lot of these scammers they're not in Vermont. They're not in Vermont, and so we really got to make sure that we're sharing our stories and protecting each other.
Thank you. My guest today was T.J. Donovan, the Vermont Attorney General. T.J., thank you for joining me today. And we are going to post the information on how to contact your office and the CAP program if people have questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliott.